Ok, estamos de vuelta entonces. Vamos a Jean-Marc, if you can join me on stage to see the results of that survey and then continue with the rest of the presentation. Jean-Marc, are you there? Can you hear me?
I can start again.
Okay, perfect. Okay, welcome back.
Let's start again, and I will start by sharing the results of the survey that you very kindly participated in. And so again, I would encourage you to use the full screen at the top right of your little gray window so that it can become a little bit bigger on your screen. So the clear winner is the first one, which is all about that conversion of documents into digital format. And I was expecting that because it's an ongoing challenge for all the large corporates. It is the starting point of any digital transformation, and nobody's finished with it completely. And AI is also adding a lot of additional value to this process, because instead of being a dumb process where there's a lot of mistakes, AI is now helping people get a much higher success rate and accuracy with this. The second is the second one, which is migration of IT to the cloud. That is also super important. I think everyone understands now that having their IT on a cloud infrastructure, public cloud infrastructure, or virtual public cloud infrastructures is a factor of major savings and major scalability. So definitely a super important point. And again, nobody's finished with it. Everybody's in the process. So that's completely understandable that it's a big priority for the team here. And then on the third place, ex aequo, so same score of 7, we have artificial intelligence and augmented reality. So these are really two of the most promising technologies that we'll be able to leverage, that we are already leveraging. And it's really about not being late on those and being able to grab these two technologies and make them do something for your enterprise that will make you look different, or that will equip you with better intelligence to deal with your market opportunities. So great answers. Thank you very much for the participation. I'm enthused with the results because it means that we have a lot of things that we're going to be able to do together for the rest of the programs, because I already know a lot of companies that we're going to be able to introduce to you and see if they can add value to your innovation process. Okay. Let's move on and let's talk about something different. I promised this, and because we're not very early on our calendar, I will go a little bit faster on this, but don't worry, because we can come back to this anytime we need during the program. When we'll be together in January and February and March, we can continue talking about this subject of design thinking. And design thinking is actually quite important when you have an innovation process. You remember at the beginning it said, open innovation, super important. You need two things. You need a good radar. You need to find these technologies, and artificial intelligence can help you find them. And you need a process. And part of the process is design thinking. It's not the only process, because you need to manage the flow of these ideas in your internal protocols or in your internal process, validation, funding, etc. But when you get close to doing something with any of these technologies, this is where design thinking becomes so important, because design thinking is a not so new, I mean, it's actually quite well known now, not so new way of taking a complex questions and bringing it to market. So let me dive straight into it. And I started by giving you a little bit of pointers as to where this comes from. And it's not that new, because it's from the 70s. I mean, this guy was a Nobel Prize winner, Herbert Simon. He's the first one who was talking about rapid prototyping and human-centered design in the 70s. So this is not a new idea. I mean, it's been around for 4 or 5 decades nearly. Now, in 87, late 80s, Peter Rowe, who was a Harvard professor, he actually wrote the book called Design Thinking. So that became the original Bible of design thinking. But he was looking at it from an architecture point of view, construction. The real winners of this are IDEO. IDEO is a Palo Alto base. They're actually just a few blocks from where I live, and a boutique consultancy that became very, very famous in the 90s and then in the 2000s, because they really created a methodology around design thinking. Practical steps. What do you do? What is the language you use? How do you do it? And that became, I mean, it was a big revenue earner for them as a consultancy, but also it became ingrained in the mindset of how people do things in Silicon Valley, that methodology. And today, I mean, it is taught, of course, in multiple schools worldwide, but the most famous is the Stanford School of Design, which has been renamed Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design. And since 2005, they've been teaching generations of executives and students about design thinking. So it's a big thing. Everybody needs to know a little bit about it. So about a definition of design thinking, what is it? Some bold terms here. Design thinking, a human-centered and collaborative approach to problem solving that's creative, iterative, and practical. So we're going to talk more about that. But the number one thing to remember is it's about humans. And it's not about machines. It is about focusing on what people want. And sometimes they don't tell you what they want. So you need to guess what they want. And the second part of the sentence says that it's creative, iterative, and practical. And that's the other part of it. It is not about theorizing and doing planning and brainstorming ad nauseum. It is about creation, and it is about creating fast and testing ideas fast. Okay, so this is, that was the definition, but now how would I explain it? I would say two things about it, about what it is, and three things about what it's not. Number one thing that it's a focus on understanding customers deeply. So in design thinking, we talk about empathy, but it means you really need to put yourself in the shoes of the customer. And sometimes you have to guess. You have to make assumptions about what customers want. You have to go beyond the obvious, because the normal approach that we had, when I was a kid and I was learning about marketing, it was all about segmentation. It was all about, I know these people are in the 30, 40-year-old urban, blah, 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 that kind of income. That defines my customer. No, that's not design thinking. That's kind of marketing, but not design thinking. Design thinking is about sitting down with customers and having long conversations with those customers. And it's also as opposed to being focused on a technology, because in many cases, when we have a new opportunity, it's based on a technology that have come out of our labs, come out of our ideas, and we're looking for an application of that idea into the market. That's not design thinking. Design thinking starts with customers, not with a product, not with a service, not with market data. It's not because we've bought market data from Gartner or whoever that we're going to create something that is particularly smart. We need design thinking for that. It's a method for testing assumptions via prototyping in very short loops. That prototyping in short loops, that's the second big idea. First idea, customers. Second idea, rapid prototyping. And as opposed to long planning, theoretical design, long cycles, I like to tell the story of the Wright brothers who invented aviation in 1903. Do you remember that story of these two brothers that were the first ones to have a plane that was able to fly? One thing that people forget in that story, because we all remember the names of the Wright brothers, but we forget that there was a guy called Sam Langley. Sam Langley, at the same time in Washington, was the guy who had the government funding. He was a rich guy. He was an industrialist of the time. He was like the Ford of the time, or you could say he was the Bill Gates, or he was the Elon Musk of the time. That guy Langley, everybody was betting on him. They were sure he would invent the first plane before these kids, the Wright brothers, that were just two kids with very little support. They had very little funding, actually. He had all the funding. What's the difference? The difference is that they had up to 2 prototypes per week, when they tried to create the aviation. They failed so many times. Every time they prototyped something, they failed, they learned, they changed, they corrected. During a period of 5 years of gestion, they had so many prototypes that people couldn't count them. Langley, he made 2 prototypes in a period of 5 years. See the result? You spend longer cycles, you try and polish that prototype so that it becomes so good, and the cost of the failure becomes very high. That is a super important idea in design thinking. What it's not just a wall full of post-it notes. It's not something about crazy ideas that are not viable. There's a very strong sense of viability, economic viability in design thinking. And it's not a solution for all product designs. I mean, there are some product designs where design thinking doesn't work as well. And where is it the most useful? So mainly when it's solving problems where humans are involved. I mean, if it's only a machine-to-machine problem, how do you make this application work with that application, where those applications are really machine applications and they're not about humans, then perhaps that's not the best solution for you. It's best when you're trying to define a new product or a new service. It's best when you do have access to quality customer interactions. You need to be able to sit down with customers and they don't say everything. So the biggest example, and I always remember that because I was involved in this, we created at BT, we had a service for helping old people. They're not taking their medication. And we was racking our brains, how do we get them to take their medication? And we had the cap, on top of the medication box that you could twist open, and it would send the children a signal if that hadn't been opened, etc., etc. Well, net, you never understand why people do not take their medications, and it's not always because they forget. In many cases, it is because people do not want to admit to themselves that they are sick to the point that they need to take a medication every day. They don't want to admit it to themselves. They force themselves to think that they're still healthy when they're not healthy. And of course, it causes also the problem. But just an example to tell you that, customers don't tell you everything. You really have to go deep into conversations with them to read their psyches. And that's what is design thinking. The cost of an error can be disastrous. The Langley example, Sam Langley, 2 prototypes, both failed, spending millions and millions, and the Wright brothers made it through. It's not reserved to software designer. I hear that a lot. I hear people say, oh, yeah, that's for Silicon Valley. It's for people who write code and write software. It's so easy for them to do prototyping. For us in industry, it's so hard. Not true. I mean, what you have to do is to become good at what it is you're going to prototype. It's not always the whole machine. It can be one particular movement of the machine. Example, again, the Wright brothers, right? They were not about software. They were about inventing aviation and what flies or what doesn't fly. That could be difficult to be more probing than that. Okay, principles and mindset. So I've already talked about empathy. This is about customers, and you see the little heart there. It's not just about seeing the customer from afar. It's knowing your customer by heart. Show, don't tell. So that's another big thing about design thinking. It's not about having description documents and writing up specs and being super precise about what's going to happen. It's about showing it. It's about creating a prototype and showing it. Showing it particularly to customers so that they can give their perspective, and then experiment, which means once you hear back from customer after showing it, then you know what you need to change. And that's the fast experimentation loop. Okay, let me give you an example of something called personas, and that's super important in design thinking. And please do not copy this one and circulate it inside your company. This is copyrighted, and this is a methodology that is actually quite expensive to use. So don't copy it. I'm just giving it to you as an example. This is something I did to work on an idea, which was a consultancy company idea of mine a few years back. And it was about innovation consultancy. And I defined 3 personas that I would sell my consulting services to in a large corporation. And you can see I put pictures, and I also describe what they are. I mean, it might be too small for you to read, but this guy, Peter, is the board member, and that's the guy who I would sell my innovation consulting to. On his right is another guy who's Arnold, and Arnold is the CEO. And the CEO thinks he's doing well in his job on innovation, but Peter, the board member, does not think that. He thinks the innovation is not fast enough in the company. And then you have the innovation manager, Nancy, on the right, and she's got a different set of opinions. And for each of these guys, you describe exactly where their mindset is. And you see on the here, let me show you with the pointer. You see there's something called top social jobs, top emotional jobs, top functional jobs. These are 3 dimensions that people try and research in design thinking. So social job is, what are, what do people need to feel like or to look like compared to them? So they need to look like they're in control. The board guy needs to look like he's in control of the company on behalf of shareholders. He needs to avoid looking soft or complacent with management. Okay, he needs to, the CEO, he needs to look in control for his board, right? So I mean, these are the perception. The social perception thing is one big dimension of what you need to understand with your customer. The emotional job is what they feel. So again, the guy needs to feel respected, the board member, and the CEO needs to feel reassured that growth will materialize. And the innovation lady, she needs to feel admired by her team, right? So the feelings are also part of this. And then there's the functional job. So what does the product or the service need to do to help them in their job? But I'm just showing you that so that you understand the depth of what we mean when we talk about personas in design thinking. That's a very important concept. Design thinking is all about personas. So here is what I do when I do design thinking. But you know what? Rather than show you this, because this is a very small thing, you're not going to be able to see it, I am going to show it to you on a, let me do it with a live example. I'm going to share my screen again. And I'll show you a live exercise that I did last week. Actually, it was last week, which is a live design thinking exercise. This is on a platform that is called Mural. And I can zoom out and show you the big mural. There were 4 teams here. You see the 4 boards. I'm going to show you the green team, which was my team. And I'm going to zoom on it. And when we do an exercise like that in design thinking, we start with the customer. And when we are working remotely like that, what we do for customer perception is we have pictures. And we ask people to guess who that customer is just by looking at pictures. In those pictures, you can see that that customer has a young child, maybe 2 young children, that he likes this type of food, that he has a cat, that he likes books. So you start writing down everything you know and understand from an anthropological perspective with the customer, and you try and build a scenario of what that customer is. What type of age you give it, where you give it a name. You say, okay, he's about that age in that life stage, this type of job, married, not married. You start filling in these things just from looking at the pictures. And this is a group exercise, by the way. You have on average between 5 and 10 people max, normally 8 people max participating per group. We had 4 groups in that case, where 25 people. Now, the next thing you focus on is what are the love, hates, and needs. And that's very similar to what I was showing you a minute ago. What does that customer love? What does he hate? What are his needs? This is the emotional and the social thing that we're talking about. Then I give people an industry in which to work. So in that case, it was the insurance. Sorry, it's in French, but it's insurance industry. And now they need to apply this to the insurance business. So knowing this particular customer, what could be an opportunity for this particular customer? And they say, okay, well, in this case, maybe the insurance product is to ensure that they can, get whatever they need in their domestic life, even though they've got a very busy life because of the children. So, that's the idea that they had. And you write an opportunity. After that, you move straight into creating ideas. Now, this is the big brainstorm that people think about. We have Post-it notes. and you can double click and create a new post-it note here. You can see that. I mean, it's automatic on the board, and people put their ideas there. It's a big brainstorm, and then you see the little dots, the colored dots there. These are votes. So people voted on the ideas that they liked the best. And of course, you extract after that the idea that you want to work on. And they decided that the big idea was a connected button to call Mrs. Doubtfire or Mary Poppins to secure their or assist their domestic life at home. And then you move on to designing and prototyping. So the designing of the product is you design what it looks like and how you create it, and you design the user journey, which is how people use it. And then you start prototyping it. And prototyping it, you can do anything. You can use diagrams, pictures. You can also use, in that case, they had some, this little toy. What do you call it in Spanish? This pata modeling paste that they could do little prototypes with. So that was a fun moment of building it. And finally, they do a share out. So in 1 minute per group, they explain the story of what is the idea and the design. So I'm just giving you that example here to tell you that, hey, design thinking is not dead. Not only can you do design thinking, but you can do group exercises of design thinking to train people on how you do design thinking with tools like Mural, which, by the way, Mural, that company is headquartered in South America. There's another one called Miro. And these are the tools that everybody's using at the moment in Silicon Valley, right? So that's what I wanted to show you on this. And a final slide for you guys. I'm just going to show you my final slide on design thinking. It is just to say, I'm just going to show you that in a minute. Bear with me. I'm sharing my screen again. Okay, so the final slide is to say, the whole idea is prototyping, but you don't prototype without knowing why you prototype something. In order to prototype something, you need to have a certain number of assumptions. And the assumptions are about lifting uncertainty. These uncertainty can be of different types. They can be demand uncertainties. You don't know if there's going to be a market for it, if there's going to be enough customers. They can be technical. You don't know if it's going to be feasible. Or they can be external. You don't know if there's a competitor that's going to come in or if the regulation is going to stop you from doing it. So for every single risk or assumption, you need to rate it and say, what type of uncertainty is it? How important is it? And I should show you that. How important, type of uncertainty. And then you write here in a box how you're going to test it. What is the test? What is the prototype that you're going to create to test and lift that uncertainty? Okay, so there's a whole methodology behind this, and this is what you do in real life when you're about to launch a product. This last thing here, the one I showed you just before, is more an exercise for fun to show your teams how to do design thinking, to get them minded to do design thinking. But when you get to real things, you do things like what I'm showing you now. And again, please don't copy this. This is part of Innovator's DNA. This is not something we're allowed to distribute or anything like that. Okay, now, muchas gracias a todos. Thank you very much for being such a patient audience and listening attentively, for participating in the program. And I hand it back over to you. We might have a few minutes at the end, but you have to hear from Constanta first. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. I think that you said it all. The customer, it's all about the customer. Our customer needs and our needs, that becomes our challenge, right, to resolve. So great presentation. Thank you so much.